All right, folks, now that we understand how market dynamics works, the movement of these curves when the demand curve or the supply curve move to the right or to the left due to an increase or a decrease, what I now want to do is I want to talk about, just briefly, what I call basic determinants of changes in supply or demand. What I mean by determinants of changes, what I mean is what makes the demand curve move? What causes the demand curve to move over to the right? What causes the demand curve to move over to the left? Or the supply curve to the right or to the left? This is an important idea, an important piece of knowledge that is basic in economics. And what I want to do in this particular lesson is I just want to give you a basic introduction to the idea of factors or variables that move the supply and the demand curve, okay? And I'm only going to give you one thing that affects demand, and I'm only going to give you one thing that affects supply. And these are the big things. These are the main things that affect supply and demand. On the demand side, the main thing that affects demand very simply is how many buyers are in the market. And we call that number of buyers. And so over here, what I want you to understand for an increase in demand is this, is we will typically experience a market will experience an increase in demand simply when there is an increase in the number of buyers. Meaning, here's very simple. There were previously 10,000 people who were willing and able to buy. Now, there are 13,000 people who are willing and able to buy. That's just simply there are more people now who are willing to buy it, they want it, and they are able to buy it. They have enough money to buy it. People have entered the market as buyers, and therefore demand will increase. Okay? So here's what happens. When there is an increase in the number of buyers in a market, that's going to result in an increase in demand, which will lead to a right shift of the demand curve. And when the demand curve shifts to the right, we're going to have a new intersection point, and that'll result in an increase in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. So that's going to result in an increase in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. So here's what we can say, and these are the kinds of questions that I could potentially ask you. If I simply say to you, if there's an increase in the number of buyers in a product market, what will happen to the price in that market? And you should then understand that an increase in the number of buyers leads to an increase in demand, a rightward shift of the demand curve, and then an increase in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. Doesn't that make sense? When there are more people who are willing and able to buy something, the price goes up and they sell more of it. They produce more of it and they sell more of it. Okay? All right. On the other hand, what if there's a decrease in the number of buyers? Well, if there are fewer buyers, fewer people who are willing and able to buy, well, that means that there's going to be less demand for that product. So it's going to be a decrease in demand, which is going to lead to a left shift of the demand curve. A left shift of the demand curve is going to result in a decrease in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. So that's going to result in a decrease in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. And so really what we can summarize is just simply saying when there's a decrease in the number of buyers in a market, the price is going to go down and the quantity produced and sold is also going to go down. So now let's talk about supply. What affects supply? All right, so in order to understand this, I want to sort of give you not an analogy, but sort of explain it casually before we do it on the graph, okay? what affects supply? Well, producers, here's what they do. They make stuff. Now, in order to make stuff, they need money. So if they want to make something, let's say that they want to make a TV and sell it for $500. Well, before they can sell it for $500, they need to buy supply. They have to buy parts to make the TV. They need to pay their employees to make it. They need to buy electronic parts. They got to have a building. They have to have all kinds of stuff, okay? And so the question is, what's going to affect how much they can make? Remember, their production or supply is the willingness and ability to produce and sell. Well, here's another way to think about it. Not make them more willing to and able to produce or less willing and able to produce. How about willing and able to produce more? Producing more stuff. Willing and able to produce more stuff and willing and able to produce less stuff. Well, the main thing that affects how much they're willing to make and how much they're able to make is how much it costs them to make it. So if it cost, let's say that they have $10,000 in the bank, and it costs them, so here's what we're going to say, that the TV maker has $10,000 in the bank, or $10,000 that's available to them. And it costs them $100 for each TV. How many TVs can they produce? Well, if we divide 1,000 by 100, we get 100. So they can make 100 TVs. If they cost 100 to produce, and they have $10,000 available to them, they can make 100 TVs. Well, what if the price of producing goes down? What if it only costs $50 to produce each TV? Well, now they have access to $10,000. They can produce more TVs because each TV now only costs $50 to produce. If we divide $10,000 by $50, that's 200 TVs. What just happened to supply? Supply just increased. They were supplying 100, now they're supplying 200. Why? Because the cost of production went down from $100 per unit to $50 per unit. On the other hand, what if the cost of production went up? What if it now costs $200 to produce each TV? Why would the cost of production go up? Oh, well, it could be that the electronic components are now more expensive to buy. It could be that the employees have demanded a raise and now they have to pay their employees more. There's lots of reasons why production costs can go up or down. But now let's say it costs $200 to produce each TV. Well, if we divide $10,000 by $200, well, that's only 50 TVs. And so, because the cost of production went up, the supply of TVs went down, and that's a decrease in supply. And what that leads me to now is the idea. What it is that I want you to understand is that the basic determinant of supply is production costs. So, here's how it goes. When there is a decrease in production costs or costs of production. Now, I typically represent production costs with PC. So what we have going on here is it's a decrease in PC, production costs, okay? So a decrease in production costs is going to lead to, so I'm putting a sideways arrow, is going to lead to an increase in supply. Because it costs less to produce the TVs, they can make more TVs. That's an increase in supply. When supply increases, that's going to be a right shift of the supply curve. And when the supply curve shifts to the right, we will see a decrease in the equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. So, when production costs go down, we are going to see a decrease in equilibrium price and an increase in equilibrium quantity. Okay, so this is something that you need to understand. We're going to keep coming back to this idea, especially production costs, for the rest of this semester, over and over and over again. I'm going to be asking you, hey, what happens when the production costs go down in this economy, or what happens to this product when the production costs go down? You have to know that a decrease in production costs affects supply, not demand. Production costs do not directly affect demand. That's number of buyers, okay? Production costs affect supply. And when production costs go down, the price goes down, and the quantity produced goes up, and the quantity sold goes up. On the other hand, if in this market, if there's an increase in production costs, okay, we're going to represent that as an upward arrow with PC. PC means production costs. An increase in production costs, because it costs more money to make each TV, we can't make as many TVs. Therefore, supply will go down, which will result in a left shift of the supply curve. And a left shift of the supply curve results in an increase in equilibrium price and a decrease in equilibrium quantity. So that's going to cause the price to go up and the quantity produced and sold to go down. And that's it for this segment. These are the basic determinants of changes in supply and demand. I sometimes call them the basic determinants of supply and demand.